I see the people, I hear the music, I smell the smells, and they are a variety of smells between the marijuana and, the fact that there weren't really any.
They called it 3 days of peace and music, but beneath the anthems and applause, Woodstock was far messier, stranger, and more unforgettable than anyone ever imagined. And the truth was captured in photos the world was never meant to see. People slipped into hallucinations from tainted drinks, storms turned the fields into rivers, and a haunting warning echoed through the air. Some moments were pure magic, others deeply unsettling. And together they tell the story of Woodstock most people don't remember: unintended hallucination trips. One of the wildest things about Woodstock wasn't just the music, it was what people were unknowingly putting into their bodies. The festival had a free-spirited, anything-goes vibe, and that included food and drinks being passed around by strangers. The problem? Some of those refreshments were secretly laced with hallucinogens. People thought they were grabbing lemonade or a brownie, only to find themselves suddenly seeing colors melt and the sky breathe. Medical tents quickly filled with confused, terrified festival-goers who had no idea what was happening to them. Volunteers and medics worked non-stop, trying to calm people down as waves of panic spread through the crowd. Photos taken during those chaotic hours show young men and women lying in the grass, eyes wide open, while others sit nearby, comforting them or fanning their faces. Medical supply shortages. By the second day of Woodstock, it was clear the organizers had no idea how massive this thing was going to be. Nearly 500,000 people packed into muddy fields, and the festival's small medical team suddenly had to deal with everything from sprained ankles and dehydration to bad trips and infections. Supplies ran out fast. There weren't enough bandages, disinfectants, or even basic medication. Doctors and volunteers did what they could, sometimes using alcohol as an antiseptic because it was the only thing strong enough on hand. Makeshift medical tents popped up across the site, simple tarps stretched over poles, filled with stretchers made from wooden planks and blankets. Helicopters were eventually called in to drop off emergency supplies, swooping low over the crowd like something out of a war zone. Surprisingly, the people inside those tents weren't just trained medics. Many were volunteers improvising as they went, trying to help however they could. Photos from the scene show nurses and festival staff kneeling beside patients in the mud, treating cuts and calming panic attacks with almost nothing to work with. It was chaotic, improvised medicine in its purest form, held together by compassion and sheer necessity. Rain-soaked dancing. When the storm finally hit Woodstock, it didn't stop the music. It just changed the rhythm. Sheets of rain came pouring down, soaking everything in sight. The fields turned into thick mud, the kind that clung to your feet and made every step a slippery challenge. But instead of running for cover, thousands of people stayed right where they were. They laughed, shouted, and started to dance. Barefoot and drenched, they swayed together as bands kept playing through the downpour. What could have been a disaster turned into one of the most unforgettable sights of the festival. A massive crowd moving in unison, completely unbothered by the storm. The moment became a spontaneous act of joy that perfectly captured the spirit of Woodstock. Photos from that day show a sea of muddy faces, arms raised toward the sky, everyone completely lost in the music and the moment. It wasn't about staying dry or clean. It was about being free, together, in the middle of chaos, turning the rain into part of the experience itself. Tower climbers. Not everyone at Woodstock was content to sit in the mud and squint at the stage from a distance. Some decided to take the high road, literally. A handful of fearless attendees began climbing the towering speaker scaffolds that lined the stage, determined to get the best view in the house. Before long, those towers became unofficial observation decks, with shirtless climbers perched like birds above the crowd, waving and cheering as the music blasted below. Security warned them to come down, but few listened. The view, the thrill, and the attention were too good to give up. From the ground, they looked almost mythical, small figures against the open sky, silhouetted by the lights and haze of sound. Photos from the scene show them grinning and waving from the top, surrounded by the vastness of the crowd below. every inch of the field alive with movement. It was reckless, risky, and completely in tune with the free-spirited energy that defined the festival. Jimi Hendrix's Sunrise Set. Jimi Hendrix's performance at Woodstock was the final note of an era-defining weekend. When he took the stage early Monday morning, the crowd that had once stretched to the horizon had thinned to about 30,000 worn-out festival-goers. Most were half asleep, draped in blankets, surrounded by the wreckage of a 3-day storm of music and mud. Hendrix appeared in a white fringed jacket, headband tight around his forehead, his guitar hanging low like a weapon of peace. The field was quiet at first, then his amplifier cracked alive, and he launched into a version of the Star-Spangled Banner that no one had ever heard before. His electric guitar screamed and wailed through feedback, mimicking the sounds of bombs, jets, and chaos, a haunting reflection of the Vietnam War that was tearing America apart. It was a performance that felt both rebellious and patriotic, depending on who was listening. The rare photos from that morning show him drenched in sweat, the mist of dawn clinging to his clothes as he poured the last of his energy into the strings. Joe Cocker's Thunderstorm Performance. Joe Cocker's performance at Woodstock is remembered as one of those perfect accidents of timing, the kind you couldn't script even if you tried. It was the final day of the festival. The air was thick with humidity and exhaustion, and Cocker walked out onto the stage barefoot, shirt untucked, ready to give everything he had left. His voice was gravelly, raw, and soulful as he launched into "With a Little Help from My Friends," turning the Beatles song into something entirely his own. The crowd swayed and sang along, thousands of tired faces lighting up one last time. But as his final notes echoed across the field, something shifted. The wind picked up, the sky turned a dark electric gray, and the first rumble of thunder rolled in. Within minutes, the rain came crashing down. People scattered for cover, clinging to tarps and sleeping bags while the stage crew rushed to protect the equipment. Rare photos captured Cocker standing against that ominous backdrop, mid-performance with storms looming. Moments later, the downpour swallowed everything, and Woodstock went silent except for the sound of rain pounding the muddy earth. Sri Swami Satchidananda's opening invocation. Before the amps buzzed to life and the music took over, Woodstock surprisingly began with a moment of calm. Sri Swami Satchidananda, a Hindu monk known for promoting peace and spiritual unity, was invited to open the festival. When he stepped onto the stage in his flowing orange robes, the crowd fell unusually quiet. 500,000 people sat in front of him, still settling in, covered in blankets and early summer dust. He greeted them as brothers and sisters, his voice soft but commanding, and spoke about the power of music to bring people together when politics and war only seemed to push them apart. His message was simple, that harmony wasn't just found in sound, but in spirit. The field, still buzzing from days of anticipation, turned almost reverent as he blessed the festival. Photos from that morning show him before the endless sea of faces, hands raised in prayer, framed by the wooden arches of the unfinished stage. It was a surreal sight, a serene spiritual leader opening what would become the loudest, wildest concert of a generation. Yet in the middle of the noise, the mud, and the madness, Woodstock witnessed another extraordinary moment when one man sat perfectly still, high above it all, lost in the pages of a book. Lost in the book. Amid the sea of chaos that was Woodstock, one photograph captured something completely different. A man perched high above the crowd, calmly reading a book. While hundreds of thousands danced, cheered, and swayed below, he sat on a wooden beam, legs dangling, eyes fixed on the pages in front of him. Nobody knows what he was reading or why he chose that moment, but the image became one of the festival's quietest and most striking symbols. It showed that even in the middle of the counterculture's loudest celebration, there was room for reflection and thought. This photo represents a side of the movement that was often overlooked. The introspective dreamers, the thinkers who believed change started in the mind before the streets. The man behind the land. Woodstock might never have happened without Max Yasker. When the original venue in Wallkill pulled out just weeks before the festival, panic set in. That's when Yasgur, a dairy farmer from Bethel, New York, stepped forward and offered his land. 600 acres of open fields and rolling hills that would soon become the heart of a cultural revolution. He wasn't a rock fan or a hippie. He was a practical, middle-aged farmer who simply believed in people's right to gather peacefully. His decision didn't sit well with his neighbors, but he stood by it, even as traffic jams and noise complaints rolled in. During the festival, he walked among the crowd, smiling and shaking hands with strangers who thanked him for giving them a place to belong. Photos show him beaming as muddy, grateful attendees hugged him like an old friend. Yasgur became an unlikely hero of Woodstock, remembered for saving the movement. Nomadic hygiene. With nearly 500,000 people camping out for days, personal hygiene quickly turned into an adventure of its own. There were far too few bathrooms, and the few that existed were overflowing within hours, so people got creative. Some lined up at hosepipes to rinse off, while others wandered to nearby lakes and ponds, turning them into makeshift bathing spots. Groups gathered in the water, laughing, splashing, and washing off layers of mud and exhaustion. What started as a necessity became a kind of communal ritual. Strangers helping each other rinse their hair, sharing soap, and turning hygiene into another expression of freedom. The photos from those moments captured genuine happiness. People completely unbothered by the dirt, connected by the simple act of washing away the chaos for a few minutes. And once the water drained away and the music faded, something else started to pile up across the fields. Mountains of trash. When the music finally stopped, what was left behind looked nothing like the peaceful paradise people had imagined. 500,000 attendees meant 500,000 meals, bottles, and wrappers scattered across the fields. By the end of the weekend, Woodstock was buried under mountains of trash. Food containers, wet clothes, and makeshift shelters mixed with mud to create a landscape that looked more like a landfill than a festival ground. The cleanup took weeks, and Max Yasgur's once green dairy farm was temporarily destroyed. Crews of volunteers and locals worked tirelessly, filling bags, hauling debris, and trying to restore the land to something recognizable. Photos from those final days show musicians still performing as heaps of garbage sat just a few feet away, a strange contrast between beauty and chaos. The dream of peace and love came with a heavy dose of reality, and the aftermath showed just how unprepared everyone had been for the scale of it all. Thankfully, the farm would eventually recover, but for a while, Woodstock's legacy was literally buried under the weight of its own celebration. 3-day traffic standstill. Getting to Woodstock was an event in itself. As word spread that something incredible was happening in Bethel, New York, cars flooded the highways in every direction. Soon the roads were completely gridlocked, with miles of vehicles stuck in place, horns silent because no one could move anyway. Some people abandoned their cars altogether, choosing to walk the rest of the way, sometimes up to 10 miles, just to reach the music. Others slept inside their vehicles, using blankets and sleeping bags to wait it out. Photos from those days show highways lined with stranded cars, young people walking barefoot along the shoulders, and makeshift camps forming right there on the pavement. It became one of the longest traffic jams in American history, a moving monument to how far people were willing to go for the experience. Sly and the Family Stone's midnight set. By the early hours of August 17th, most people were exhausted, cold, and half asleep in the mud until Sly and the Family Stone took the stage. What happened next is still talked about as one of the most electrifying performances in Woodstock history. With their blend of funk, soul, and rock, the band brought the crowd back to life. Sly Stone, in his sequined vest and boundless energy, shouted, "I want to take you higher!" And the audience did exactly that. Tens of thousands of people shot to their feet, dancing and clapping through the night, shaking off fatigue and rain like they didn't exist. The band's energy was contagious, every note hitting like caffeine to a weary soul. As one of the few multiracial, mixed-gender bands on the lineup, their presence carried more than just sound. It was a statement of unity and power. Photos from that set show the stage glowing against the darkness, faces in the crowd lit by spotlights, and pure adrenaline. Romantic moments. Even in the middle of mud, noise, and exhaustion, love found its way into the story of Woodstock. Between the music and the madness, couples were caught sharing quiet, tender moments that seemed to exist outside the chaos around them. Some danced barefoot in the rain, some sat close under blankets, and others simply held each other as the world blurred into sound. The festival became a living postcard of the raw, spontaneous love that fit perfectly with the spirit of the 60s. One of the most famous photos ever taken at Woodstock shows a young couple wrapped in a blanket, standing barefoot in the mud, surrounded by sleeping bodies and debris. Those photos didn't just capture romance, they captured connection, a shared warmth in the middle of a crowd that somehow felt personal. Helpful strangers. Despite the overcrowding, shortages, and chaos, one thing that stood out at Woodstock was how much people genuinely cared for each other. Everywhere you looked, there were small acts of kindness. Strangers shared food, carried water, helped the sick, and offered comfort to anyone who needed it. When people fainted from exhaustion or bad trips, others rushed to help, fanning them, holding their hands, or guiding them to medical tents. 2 births were recorded during the festival, babies literally born into the heart of the counterculture, along with 2 deaths. Stark reminders of how fragile it all was. Yet, even in those moments, the crowd responded with compassion instead of panic. Photos from the festival show women supporting dazed or fainting attendees, volunteers handing out fruit and drinks, and impromptu groups forming to check on each other. It wasn't organized or planned, it was instinct. For a weekend that could have descended into total chaos, it somehow became an experiment in shared humanity, powered by empathy and the belief that everyone there was part of something bigger than themselves. Creative shelter solutions. By the second night, it was clear that sleeping arrangements at Woodstock were going to require some imagination. With no hotels, not nearly enough tents, and unpredictable weather, people turned whatever they could find into shelter. Some curled up in cars, windows cracked open to the damp summer air. Others stretched tarps, ponchos, and plastic sheets across branches or fences, turning them into makeshift roofs. One man even became famous for sleeping in the trunk of a Volkswagen Beetle, proving that comfort was optional when the experience was once in a lifetime. Everywhere you looked, the field had transformed into a patchwork village of creativity. Blankets tied to poles, sleeping bags tucked beneath stage scaffolding, and people squeezed together for warmth. The photos from those nights tell their own story of improvisation and togetherness. And as the long nights stretched on, some found a more playful way to make the muddy chaos a little more fun. Skyward fun. Amid the mud, music, and mayhem, Woodstock had its own kind of playground. Between performances, people found creative ways to pass the time, including building makeshift trampolines and hanging rope swings from nearby trees and scaffolding. It was pure, spontaneous fun. Attendees launched themselves into the air, laughing as they bounced or swung over the muddy ground, the crowd cheering them on like it was part of the show. These little moments broke up the long stretches between sets and reminded everyone that Woodstock wasn't just about the music. It was about being young, free, and fearless. The festival grounds became a mix of carnival and campsite, where imagination filled in for structure. Photos from those sunny breaks show smiling faces mid-air, hair flying, surrounded by laughter and applause. Nobody was worried about dirt, danger, or dignity. The energy was too high, too alive. In a weekend built on breaking rules, even flying a few feet above the mud felt like rebellion in its own joyful way. Pre-digital communication. In a time before smartphones or social media, staying connected at Woodstock was a whole different challenge. 500,000 people packed into the countryside with no quick way to find each other once they got separated. There were no texts or calls, just handwritten notes pinned to message boards, word-of-mouth directions, and the occasional payphone line that stretched endlessly. People scrawled messages on scraps of paper, pointing to directions and locations. It became its own social system, built on patience and hope. Journalists covering the event worked under tents with typewriters and film cameras, racing to capture the story as it unfolded without any of today's instant tools. Photos from the scene show long queues at payphones, reporters hunched over portable typewriters, and friends squinting at handwritten notes tacked to boards. Somehow, it worked. Despite the chaos and the crowds, People managed to find each other, tell their stories, and stay connected, all without a single notification sound or a glowing screen. Post-Woodstock departure chaos. When the last notes finally faded, getting out of Woodstock turned out to be just as chaotic as getting in. The roads around Bethel were completely jammed with miles of cars inching forward or not moving at all. Locals found themselves trapped in their own driveways, unable to leave or even get supplies. Many festival goers were too tired to move right away. They slept in their cars, lingered in fields, or simply waited for the gridlock to ease. The once lively grounds were now a wreck of mud, trash, and tents half buried in the earth. Volunteers and nearby residents tried to help where they could, offering food and water to people still stuck on the roads. Photos from those final days show weary travelers trudging through littered fields, hitchhikers holding signs, and endless lines of cars stretching toward the horizon. The festival had started as a symbol of freedom but ended with a long, slow crawl back to reality. Everyone who made it out carried a mix of exhaustion and awe, knowing they had been part of something legendary even if it took them days to finally leave it behind. The Hog Farm's role. If Woodstock had any group holding things together amid the madness, it was the Hog Farm Collective. Originally invited to provide food and support, they ended up becoming the festival's unofficial everything, from cooks to medics, security, and moral support rolled into one. Led by peace activist and counterculture icon Wavy Gravy, the Hog Farm didn't believe in traditional authority. Instead of batons or confrontation, they relied on humor, calm voices, and what they called please force. When fights or bad trips broke out, they talked people down, offered water, and diffused tension with kindness. They were the human glue holding a chaotic utopia in place. Their operation was run out of buses and tents, fueled entirely by teamwork and improvisation. Photos from those days show members in tie-dye shirts and aprons, smiling as they served meals and tended to people in distress. They embodied the best version of Woodstock's ideals: peace, cooperation, and community in action. Without them, the festival's story might have taken a very different turn. Janis Joplin's emotional backstage moment. Janis Joplin's set at Woodstock was everything her fans expected: wild, soulful, and unforgettable. But behind the spotlight, she was running on fumes. She performed late on Saturday night after hours of delays, facing a crowd that was drained from days of rain, illicit substances, and sleeplessness. Still, she gave it her all, her raspy voice tearing through the air as she poured herself into every note. The applause was genuine, but the energy from the audience wasn't what she was used to. When she finally walked off stage, the adrenaline faded fast. Backstage, photographers caught a rare, unguarded moment of Janis sitting quietly, eyes heavy, drink in hand, her hair clinging to her face. She looked completely spent, caught between triumph and exhaustion. That image became one of the most powerful behind-the-scenes photos from Woodstock, a reminder that even icons have limits. On stage, she was electric and untouchable. Off stage, she was human, feeling the full weight of what the weekend had become: the Mudslide Games. By the third day of Woodstock, the rain had turned Max Yasker's farm into one enormous swamp. For most people, that might have been the end of the fun, but not here. Instead, festival goers decided to turn the mud into a playground. It started with a few people sliding down the slick hills just for laughs, and soon it caught on like wildfire. Dozens joined in, racing each other down muddy slopes, spinning, laughing, and cheering as the crowd watched. Nobody cared about being dirty. It was pure, unfiltered joy. These impromptu mudslide games became one of the festival's most unforgettable sights. People dove headfirst, coated from head to toe, turning misery into fun with a kind of childlike abandon. The air was filled with music, rain, and laughter, the perfect mix of chaos and freedom. Photos from that day show grinning faces hidden under layers of mud, hands raised, and friends helping each other back up for another round. It wasn't planned or polished, just spontaneous happiness in its truest form. And as the mud dried and the music rolled on, something deeper began to happen across the festival grounds. The free kitchen tent. When the vendors ran out of food and supplies and hungry crowds began to gather near the main field, a new center of life emerged. The free kitchen tent became one of the most vital and heartwarming scenes of Woodstock. Volunteers, many from the Hog Farm and other communes, came together to cook whatever they could find. The meals weren't fancy, mostly rice, beans, vegetables, and granola, but they were warm, filling, and free. Massive pots simmered over open fires as the smell of food drifted through the damp air. Photos show endless lines of tired, hungry festival-goers, waiting patiently, some barefoot, some draped in blankets, smiling as they held out plates or tin cups. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the message. In a crowd of 500,000 strangers, nobody was left behind. Everyone was fed, one scoop at a time. The brown acid warning. In the middle of the music and mayhem, a calm yet serious voice echoed across the fields. The brown acid that is circulating around us is not specifically too good. It suggested that you stay away from that. That voice belonged to Chip Monk, Woodstock's lighting director, who found himself stepping in as an impromptu MC. His tone wasn't official or commanding. It was casual, almost gentle, but the message sent a jolt through the crowd. Word spread fast. A batch of hallucinogens was triggering frightening trips. Some people were panicking, others collapsing near the medical tents, completely disoriented. Photos from that day show Monk at the microphone, sleeves rolled up, his face serious under the stage lights. In the crowd, some stared wide-eyed toward the stage, clutching friends or lying back in the grass, trying to ride out the storm in their minds. The warning became one of Woodstock's most unforgettable moments, a surreal reminder that peace and love had their darker edge. It captured exactly what Woodstock was. A mix of chaos, care, and compassion, all unfolding under one endless sky. The rebellious fashion movement. Woodstock wasn't just a music festival, it was a fashion revolution in motion. The muddy fields of Bethel turned into an unplanned runway where self-expression reigned supreme. Everywhere you looked, there were fringe vests fluttering in the wind, hand-dyed shirts bleeding with color, and bell-bottoms that swayed like flags of defiance. For many, the clothes weren't just for show, they were statements. Every stitch, bead, and patch was a statement of rebellion. Attendees wore whatever represented freedom, from handmade jewelry to flowing dresses that looked like they were borrowed from another century. Some even turned blankets, curtains, or American flags into outfits, while others ditched fabric altogether and chose body paint as their canvas. Photos captured this wild parade of individuality, sunburned faces framed by flowers, denim patched with peace symbols, and barefoot wanderers gleaming with color. But this spontaneous explosion of style didn't fade with the weekend. It redefined what fashion could be, not dictated by magazines or designers, but born from the raw, untamed energy of a generation refusing to blend in. Which of these rare Woodstock moments stood out to you the most? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.